What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. Okay, so continuing our discussion on Sinestro Corps War, we get into the Superboy Prime one-shot. Now this is kind of interesting, and this story of course was written by Geoff Johns, but this looks like it was actually an editorial/legal mandate. And it's really kind of a funny situation because during this time, legal arguments began to resurface between the Siegel and Shuster families and DC. Because remember, they'd been suing DC repeatedly over the the rights to Superman and Superboy. But the idea was that because Superboy Prime was basically a spin-off of the Superboy concept, the idea was that all properties rooted to or based off of the Superboy idea ultimately belonged to Siegel and Shuster. And so what ended up happening is DC actually had to change the name because of the fact that they had effectively kind of won this lawsuit with regards to Superman. All things that were Superman related belonged to DC, but with Superboy it was still in contention. And so what they effectively did in this story is they used it as a way to actually change Superboy Prime into Superman Prime. Now in truth, it's really just a name change. That's really all it is. That was the only thing that was really necessary in order to pull this off. The problem is that in the realm of comic books, you can't just simply change the name of a character. It wouldn't have made sense for him to just one day say, you know what, I'm just gonna start calling myself Superman Prime, just because of the fact that DC already had DC 1 million. That line of stories was already there, and the concept of Superman Prime was already in existence. And so there had to be an explanation that could differentiate between Superboy Prime now calling himself Superman Prime and basically Superman 1 million. And so it was kind of a cool idea in terms of how this unfolded, but what this does is it actually initially picks up with Superboy Prime as part of the Sinestro Corps visiting the grave of Bart Allen. Now this again is really just a reflection of editorial mandates, and the reason why I say that is because Bart Allen was a character who originally appeared in 1994, and he was designed to be this attempt to sort of reinvigorate and keep refreshing the idea of the Flash landscape. Remember, after Crisis on Infinite Earths, there was only Wally West as the Flash, and then you just kind of had newer members, or I guess the return of older members that were gradually introduced as time went on. But Bart Allen was this descendant of the Flash family who had basically sort of just kind of aged at an accelerated rate. But the idea was to basically provide a new iteration of the Kid Flash going by the name Impulse, who could be an updated version of Wally West when he was a kid before Crisis on Infinite Earths. The problem with this was that as time progressed, and I'm not exactly sure why this was done, as time progressed, DC began the idea of basically removing his character. And this all basically goes back to the introduction of a villain by the name of Inertia. Now, Inertia was basically Thaddeus Thawne II, and the way this worked out was that in the 30th century in DC Comics, Thaddeus Thawne was a descendant of Eobard Thawne, and the idea was that Thaddeus Thawne had basically become president, and it actually created a sort of hybrid clone of Bart Allen and the original Eobard Thawne, combining their DNA to create a singular being in the form of Inertia. And what this did is it allowed for Inertia to operate as the arch enemy of Bart Allen, basically being his own version of Eobard Thawne. But again, while I'm not entirely sure about like the sales or the whole reason why this was done, all I really know is that DC had come along and basically told the writer at the time, Mark Guggenheim, that he needed to eliminate Bart Allen. And so the story that was written to pull this off was basically a story called Flash, the Fastest Man Alive. And what basically ended up happening here is Inertia developed a way to effectively strip Bart Allen of his access to the Speed Force, basically making him normal. At the same time, it also coincided with Inertia teaming up alongside the Rogues. And so because the Rogues are basically the main enemy of the Flash itself, according to editorial mandate, the story had to conclude with the Rogues killing Bart Allen. Now again, I don't know if this is really character assassination. I don't know if it was the idea that DC just wanted to get rid of him. In truth, as far as I'm aware, it's just speculation. I'm sure there's some source out there somewhere that explains that, but I haven't been able to find it. I haven't been able to find any indication or any line-by-line explanation of why DC chose to make this choice. But the fact remains that because Bart Allen was one of the Flashes who had originally defeated Superboy Prime during the events of Infinite Crisis, it created a sort of bitter anger, a bitter hatred between the two of them, especially because of the fact that Superboy Prime is terrified of speedsters. Now, the only indication of his fear of speedsters really coming takes the form of the idea that they were able to push him into the Speed Force. Not only that, the speedsters derive their power from the Speed Force itself. And so it's not like another dimension. I mean, it is to a degree, but it's not. It's not like pushing him into a different universe. It's not like putting him on Earth 2 or something along those lines. In the Speed Force, all time is kind of relative. So for Superboy Prime, where he was gone for like a day or an hour or something along those lines, lines in the Speed Force, he was there for years. And so it's effectively kind of like this living prison where he can't access, see, or talk to anybody. The other half of this is the motivation behind Superboy Prime. Remember, he's a tragic character. The way that he was written in Infinite Crisis made him a very sad character. For those of you guys who never saw my origin video on him, he basically came from Earth Prime that was part of this huge multiverse that existed before the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths. And Earth Prime in DC Comics is basically the real world. It's the world where you're sitting watching this video right now. And so Superboy Prime, growing up in this universe, basically read comics about superheroes. He read comics about Superman, during the Golden Age, Superman as he appeared in DC Comics. It's one of those weird meta commentary kind of things, but he was basically hit with cosmic energies, with the energies of a comet, and it granted him powers that made him equivalent to Superman. The other half of this was that because Kryptonite didn't exist in Earth Prime, and because of the fact that his reality of Earth Prime was destroyed in the events leading up to Crisis on Infinite Earths, Superboy Prime basically had no weaknesses aside from red sun radiation. And even then, his strength level, his endurance, his speed, it was all well beyond the idea of any of the Superman or Superwomen who existed at the time. And so where he basically was kind of shunted off to a pocket universe after the events of Crisis on Infinite Earths and then returned during Infinite Crisis, of course, again, we have those videos down in our playlist about DC Rebirth. You're welcome to check them out. The idea here was that he emerged as essentially a bad guy, because with him growing up and reading superheroes as these beings to look up to, and then seeing this new Earth continuity, this post-Crisis on Infinite Earths landscape, having superheroes become darker, a little more gritty, he basically came to believe that the superheroes as they existed were not real superheroes. They were liars, they were frauds, they were tricksters. And so the goal was that when he came out of the Paradise Dimension, when he punched reality and shattered it, he ended up just waging this war against all the superheroes across the DC universe and literally crushing everybody. I mean, there was a point where he faced off against like 33 Green Lanterns and killed them all. It was absolutely insane. Ultimately, it took the efforts of the original Golden Age Superman and the New Earth Superman to fly him through a red sun, strip him of his powers, and then the Green Lanterns to encase him in this giant green box, one of the science cells they have, to basically keep him held. But remember, during the events of, I guess part of the lead up to Sinestro Corps War, he was freed from this and he was inducted into the Sinestro Corps proper. Now, the biggest issue about this little tidbit of storytelling here is that he still uses this modified suit that he used during Infinite Crisis that's designed for the purpose, or at least seems to be designed for the purpose, to harness yellow energy. Now, the problem with this is that Geoff Johns kind of gives us this weird scenario here. When Superboy Prime used this mechanized suit, or this powered suit, during the events of Infinite Crisis, the goal was to basically have the suit serve as a battery pack of sorts, in the sense that all Superman, or all versions of Superman, Superwoman, whatever the case may be, they act as a solar battery, and so their body basically absorbs solar energy until it can't hold anymore. And once their body's supercharged, once it's fully charged with solar energy, they're as powerful as they're ever going to be. They reach the peak of their complete and total potential. What Superboy Prime did in developing this pack was basically give himself additional solar energy, which means that he could fight longer and he could fight harder than any of the existing Supermen that stood out there. This compounded the fact that he was already stronger than any of the Supermen that existed out there, so he was basically a one-man army. He was just an absolute wrecking crew. Well, of course, with this armor basically being destroyed, with him losing his powers after being locked in a science cell, and then being freed by the Sinestro Corps, this suit is not exactly like the one he wore before, but it seems as though it would serve the same purpose. The problem with this is that while he's going against the combined efforts of like the Titans and the Teen Titans and all these different superheroes, he keeps making reference to the idea that he's waiting for the yellow sun to come up. Now again, this is kind of a weird scenario because historically speaking in DC Comics, the atmosphere of the Earth plays no part in the yellow sun in terms of how it impacts a Superman. Whether Superman is standing on Earth or whether he's floating out in space, the impact of yellow sun radiation is always the same. Now, the closer he gets to the sun and the longer he spends inside the sun, the more powerful he'll become. That's one of the reasons why Superman 1,000,000 was so powerful, because he literally just stayed inside of the sun. And so his cells were just soaked with yellow sun radiation. With regards to this here, it basically looks like Superboy Prime's not nearly as powerful as he would normally be. But the idea is that if he's not as powerful as he would normally be, why wouldn't he just go to the yellow sun and then show up on Earth fully charged? We don't have an answer to that question. Instead, we just kind of have to go on the idea that he's not normally as strong as he should be. be. But once the yellow sun comes up, it basically allows his energies to begin recharging again. Now, in truth, drawing on the nature of this story and what we're seeing with him, kind of reflecting on his own life, reflecting on these moments that he's had, with regards to Lori, his girlfriend on Earth Prime, lamenting the idea of the destruction of his own Earth, the idea that he basically allied himself with the Sinestro Corps just long enough to allow the Anti-Monitor a moment of victory so that he could snatch it away and kill him. The implication seems to be here that this suit maybe reduces his powers, or this suit perhaps blocks out the yellow sun radiation to a degree, or it's just for the sake of storytelling. It's just for the sake of giving us a chance to see him kind of talking about these moments and to see him face off against some of these superheroes. Because remember, if Superboy Prime suddenly showed back up on Earth at the same power level that he was before, he would have destroyed all these superheroes without any questions. They all would have died. And so the idea is that once we have the arrival of Karen Starr, of the Power Girl, the Supergirl, basically of Earth 2, alongside Superman and the Supergirl of the main DC universe, this leads into the three of them trying the best they can to hold off Superboy Prime. Now, of course, once the sun comes up, his powers begin returning to him in full force, and he is completely energized. And so what this means is that what little chance these superheroes had to actually win is gone. They basically have no real chance anymore. Now, in terms of evolving him from Superboy Prime into Superman Prime, this comes by way of the narrative that he's basically been offering over the course of the story. Because remember, his whole life is the idea that he's come to believe that superheroes as they exist in DC Comics at the time this story has been written are not actually superheroes. Because in the mind of Superboy Prime, there's no moral ambiguity when it comes to superheroes. It's, we're good guys, they're bad guys, we fight them, we arrest them, they go to jail, done and done. That's it. There's no, sometimes we can bend the rules, sometimes we can break the rules, we hide things from our friends. That's not how Superboy Prime views superheroes. He views superheroes as being 100% in the right, always doing the right thing, no matter the circumstance. Now, again, back during that Infinite Crisis line of stories, that was designed to be a meta commentary on superheroes as they existed at the time by Geoff Johns himself. In a lot of ways, Superboy Prime was Geoff Johns as he was looking at the superhero world. But the overall idea here is that because Superboy Prime viewed these heroes as morally ambiguous, the goal was to basically take the place of Superman, to eliminate this version of Superman and replace him. And that's why he ends up calling himself Superman Prime, because there was a time in his history when he was Superboy Prime, but the reason for that was because of the fact that he had fought alongside the original 1940s Earth 2 Superman. That was a Superman he looked up to. He had no desire to take his place. He had no reason to take his place because that was a superhero that Superboy Prime idolized. But with the death of the original Earth 2 Superman, with him being removed from the equation, now there's basically a place for Superboy Prime to say, I am going to become the real Superman as he should be. I'm going to become Superman as a hero should actually be. Now, we know just by virtue of the evolution of his character, he's twisted and he's basically lost his mind. But the fact still remains that there was a lot of moral ambiguity when it came to these heroes. And so ultimately, he ends up just stripping off the Sinestro Corps uniform, which coincides with the arrival of the Anti-Monitor, with the Green Lanterns, so on and so forth, and simply just dubs himself Superman Prime. And so what this does is this segues directly into the second part of Sinestro Corps War, when we basically end up having Superman Prime facing off against the ultimate weapon of the Green Lanterns, which of course comes in the form of Ion, the current host of the willpower entity in the Green Lanterns. Of course, this is actually a guy named Sodom Yat. It's actually not Kyle Rayner, because remember, Kyle Rayner is still part of the Sinestro Corps, but it sets up the entire conflict. And let me tell you something, like, man, Superboy Prime in the second half of Sinestro Corps War, dude, it is an absolute massacre. It's one of the coolest things ever. It puts the conflict of Infinite Crisis to shame. Like, it's one of the craziest things, because Infinite Crisis, he fought everybody, right? Like he fought a ton of people. There comes a point where he ends up fighting like all the superheroes and the Sinestro Corps and the Green Lantern Corps all at the same time. And it is nuts. It's one of the coolest parts of the story. Sinestro Corps War was so good. It was so awesome, especially because of the ending of how it all ends up coming to a conclusion and what it sets for the future of the Green Lantern landscape. Anyway, guys, we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.